December 24th, 1944. The Belgian Ardennes forest stretched endlessly under a blanket of fresh snow, each branch heavy with winter's burden as the temperature plummeted to -15 degrees Celsius. In the small village of Saint-Vith, Sister Marie-Catherine stirred a massive pot of turnip soup in the convent kitchen, completely unaware that 27 members of the German Armed Forces elite unit were approaching through the darkness, their breath forming crystalline clouds in the frigid air. The soldiers believed they were about to secure a strategic position for the winter offensive. They had no idea they were walking into an encounter that would fundamentally change everything they thought they knew about war, humanity, and the true meaning of Christmas. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What happened in that small Belgian convent over the next 18 hours would transform hardened soldiers into men questioning everything they had been taught, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapons in wartime are not made of steel, but of simple human compassion. Sister Marie-Catherine had spent 38 years of her life in service to the convent of St. Agnes, a modest stone building that had stood in the Ardennes since 1296. At 54 years old, she had weathered 2 conflicts already, having been a young novice during the Great War when German forces first occupied their region. Her weathered hands, permanently stained from decades of garden work and kitchen duties, moved with practiced efficiency as she prepared what she assumed would be Christmas Eve dinner for her small community of 7 sisters. The convent sat strategically positioned on a hillside overlooking 3 converging forest paths, though the sisters had never considered their location from a military perspective. Built from local limestone and surrounded by vegetable gardens that had fed the community for centuries, the building represented everything peaceful about rural Belgian life. The massive kitchen where Sister Marie-Catherine worked featured a stone hearth large enough to cook for 50 people, a remnant from the medieval period when the convent had housed 3 times as many sisters. Unknown to the peaceful community inside, Oberscharführer Wilhelm Brenner was leading his specialized reconnaissance unit through the forest below. 27 years old and a veteran of campaigns across Eastern Europe, Brenner had earned his rank through what his superiors called exceptional tactical awareness and unwavering commitment to the cause. His unit consisted of 26 men, all between 19 and 35 years old, each carrying full winter combat equipment, including the standard-issue Kar-98 rifles and enough ammunition for an extended engagement. The men had been marching for 14 hours through increasingly hostile terrain. Their objective was to establish an observation post with clear sight lines to monitor Allied movements through the valley. Intelligence reports indicated the position would be lightly defended, requiring minimal force to secure. They expected to encounter perhaps a few local resistance fighters or displaced civilians. None of their briefings had mentioned a convent. Private Hans Müller, 19 years old and newest to the unit, struggled to keep pace with his more experienced comrades. His feet had gone numb 4 hours earlier, and the 30-kilogram pack on his shoulders felt heavier with each step. Born in a small Bavarian farming village, Müller had been conscripted 8 months earlier and had seen his first combat action only 6 weeks ago. Unlike the hardened veterans around him, he still flinched at unexpected sounds and found himself thinking of his mother's cooking whenever exhaustion overtook him. "Target structure ahead," whispered Unterscharführer Klaus Fischer, raising his field glasses to examine the convent. At 24 years old, Fischer served as Brenner's second-in-command and had developed a reputation for thorough reconnaissance. Through the lenses, he could see warm yellow light emanating from several windows and a thin trail of smoke rising from the chimney. Appears occupied. Estimate 4 to 6 civilians based on visible activity patterns. Brenner studied the building through his own binoculars, noting the stone construction and elevated position. "Perfect defensive advantage," he said to Fischer. "Commanding view of all approach routes. We establish our observation post here." He paused, lowering the glasses. "Standard procedure. Quick occupation, minimal resistance expected." The unit advanced in standard formation, with advanced scouts moving ahead of the main group. They had executed identical operations dozens of times across occupied territories. Approach under cover, surround the structure, announce military authority, and secure cooperation through presence and professional demeanor. Brenner prided himself on efficient operations that minimized complications while achieving tactical objectives. Sister Marie-Catherine heard the approaching footsteps 10 minutes before the soldiers reached the main door. Living in rural isolation for decades had sharpened her senses to distinguish between normal forest sounds and human movement. She recognized immediately that multiple individuals were approaching with military precision. Setting down her wooden ladle, she moved to the window and observed shadowy figures positioning themselves around the convent perimeter. "Sisters," she called softly to her companions, who were preparing the chapel for midnight mass. "We have visitors, German soldiers, at least 20 of them." Sister Marguerite, the youngest nun at 28 years old, felt her heart begin racing. "What do we do? Should we hide? Should we run?" "We do what we have always done," Sister Marie-Catherine replied calmly. "We show hospitality to those who come to our door." She returned to the kitchen and added more water to her soup pot. "I suspect they are cold and hungry. We shall feed them." The other sisters stared at her in amazement. Sister Bernadette, 62 years old and the convent's Mother Superior, approached cautiously. "Marie-Catherine, these are enemy soldiers. They could be here to arrest us, or worse." "They could be," Sister Marie-Catherine acknowledged, stirring the expanding soup. "But look outside. It is Christmas Eve. It is -15 degrees. They are somebody's sons, far from home, probably frightened despite their weapons and training." She tasted the soup and reached for more salt. "If we are to be arrested, we shall at least ensure they remember our Christian charity." Brenner's unit completed their surrounding maneuver and approached the main entrance. The Oberscharführer straightened his uniform, checked his sidearm, and knocked firmly on the heavy wooden door. Standard protocol called for immediate announcement of military authority, followed by demands for cooperation and compliance. Sister Marie-Catherine opened the door before the second knock. She stood in the doorway, a small woman wearing the traditional black habit of her order, her face illuminated by warm candlelight from within. She looked directly at Brenner and smiled genuinely. "Good evening," she said, in accented but clear German. "You must be terribly cold. Please, all of you, come inside immediately." Brenner stood frozen, his prepared speech forgotten. In dozens of previous operations, he had been met with fear, anger, defiance, or resigned submission. Never had anyone invited his entire unit inside with such obvious sincerity. He looked past Sister Marie-Catherine into the convent interior, noting the warm glow, religious decorations, and most surprisingly the rich aroma of cooking food. "We are conducting military operations in this area," he finally managed, reverting to his standard announcement. "This facility is required for tactical purposes." "Of course," Sister Marie-Catherine replied immediately. "You are welcome to use whatever you need, but first you must get warm and eat something. I have soup ready and there is plenty for everyone." She stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. "Please, quickly, before you all freeze." Fischer whispered urgently to Brenner, "This could be a trap. We should secure the perimeter first, search for weapons, establish control." But Brenner found himself stepping through the doorway, drawn by warmth and the unexpected kindness in the woman's voice. "We are 27 men," he said. "We do not wish to impose." "Nonsense," Sister Marie-Catherine replied, already leading them toward the main hall. "This convent has fed hungry travelers for over 600 years. 27 more souls are no burden at all." She called to her sister companions, "Please prepare the main hall. We have guests for Christmas Eve dinner." Private Mueller entered last, his teeth chattering violently from the cold. He had been raised Catholic in his Bavarian village and recognized the familiar smell of incense and beeswax candles that permeated the building. The warm, welcoming atmosphere reminded him powerfully of the village church where his mother had taken him every Sunday until his conscription. Tears formed in his eyes as homesickness overwhelmed him. Sister Marguerite approached Muller with a thick woolen blanket. "Here, young man, you are shivering terribly. Wrap yourself in this and sit by the fire." Her motherly concern was so natural and immediate that Muller accepted the blanket without thinking, allowing himself to be guided to a chair near the massive stone fireplace. The main hall of the convent had been prepared for Christmas Eve celebrations. Candles illuminated religious artwork dating back centuries, while evergreen boughs decorated with simple red ribbons adorned the walls. A large wooden table occupied the center of the room, surrounded by benches that could accommodate 30 people. The warmth from the fireplace created a stark contrast to the bitter cold outside. Sister Marie-Catherine disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later carrying an enormous pot of soup, the same pot she had been stirring when the soldiers arrived. The aroma filled the room immediately: turnips, carrots, onions, herbs, and what appeared to be precious meat stock, a luxury during wartime rationing. "I apologize that we cannot offer more elaborate fare," she said, beginning to ladle soup into large wooden bowls. "But this soup has been simmering all afternoon, and it should warm you thoroughly." She handed the first bowl to Muller, who was closest to the fire. "Eat, my son. You look like you have not had a proper meal in days." Unterscharführer Fischer remained standing near the entrance, his weapon ready despite the peaceful atmosphere. "Oberscharführer, we should establish security protocols. This situation is highly irregular." Brenner accepted a bowl of soup from Sister Marie-Catherine and found himself looking into her eyes. They were brown, lined with age and hard work, but filled with genuine warmth and concern for his well-being. When was the last time anyone had looked at him that way? His own mother had been dead for 3 years, killed during an Allied bombing raid on Munich. His wife had stopped writing letters 6 months ago. The woman standing before him was an enemy civilian, yet she was treating him with more maternal kindness than he had experienced since childhood. "5 minutes," he said to Fischer. "Let the men warm themselves, then we establish our position." But even as he spoke, Brenner found himself sitting down at the table, the warm soup bowl cradled in his hands. Sister Bernadette emerged from the kitchen carrying fresh bread, real wheat bread that must have cost the sisters dearly in wartime Belgium. She placed thick slices beside each bowl of soup without saying a word. Sister Marguerite followed with a pitcher of what appeared to be real milk, another precious commodity. The soldiers began eating slowly, unsure how to respond to such unexpected hospitality. Most had been eating cold field rations for weeks. The soup was rich, flavorful, and filling in a way that reminded each man of home cooking from their childhood. The bread was still warm from the oven, with a crust that crunched satisfyingly and soft interior that absorbed the soup perfectly. Private Muller took his first spoonful and immediately began crying. The taste transported him directly to his mother's kitchen in Bavaria, where she had made similar soup during winter evenings when the whole family gathered around their own wooden table. He tried to control his emotions, aware that his comrades were watching, but the combination of warmth, food, and kindness overwhelmed his carefully maintained soldier's composure. Sister Marie-Catherine noticed his tears and approached quietly. "What is your name, son?" she asked gently. "Hans Müller," he whispered, ashamed of his emotional display. "How old are you, Hans?" 19. Sister Marie-Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "The same age as my nephew. He is somewhere in Russia, I believe, though we have not heard from him in 8 months. She placed a gentle hand on Muller's shoulder. "I pray every day that someone, somewhere, is showing him the same kindness I show you tonight." Her words struck Muller like a physical blow. He had never considered that the enemy might have families, might worry about their sons, just as his own mother worried about him. The humanity of the statement shattered something inside his carefully constructed worldview of us versus them, good versus evil, victory or defeat. Obergefreiter Anton Weber, a 26-year-old veteran from Hamburg, overheard the exchange. Weber had participated in operations across Poland and France, always maintaining emotional distance from civilian populations. But Sister Marie-Catherine's comment about her nephew forced him to confront an uncomfortable realization. Every man in his unit was someone's son, brother, or husband, just as every enemy soldier they faced had people who loved and worried about them. "Sister," Weber said hesitantly, "why are you being so kind to us? We are your enemies." Sister Marie-Catherine finished serving soup to the last soldier and sat down at the head of the table. "Are you?" she asked simply. "You are young men far from home, cold and hungry on Christmas Eve. I see no enemies here. I see children of God who need food and warmth." She gestured around the room at the religious decorations. "This is the celebration of Christ's birth. The night when God chose to enter our world as a vulnerable baby, born to parents who had no place to stay and found shelter only through the kindness of strangers. She smiled at the assembled soldiers. How could I turn away anyone on such a night? Brenner had been listening to this exchange while mechanically eating his soup. The woman's words forced him to confront contradictions in his own thinking that he had successfully avoided for months. He had been taught that the people in occupied territories were obstacles to German advancement, problems to be managed efficiently and firmly. Yet here was a woman who had every reason to hate him and his men, instead feeding them the best meal they had eaten in weeks. "You realize," he said carefully, "that we are here to establish a military position. We may need to remain for days or weeks." "Then you will need more than one meal," Sister Marie Catherine replied practically. "We have root vegetables from our garden, preserved meat from autumn slaughter, flour for bread. Not luxury, but enough to keep you fed and healthy." Sister Bernadette looked at her colleague in amazement. They were offering to feed 27 enemy soldiers for an indefinite period, using food stores that were meant to sustain 7 sisters through the entire winter. It was either the most foolish decision imaginable or the most courageous act of Christian faith she had ever witnessed. "Why?" Brenner asked directly. "Why would you sacrifice your own food for enemy soldiers?" Sister Marie Catherine was quiet for a long moment, looking around the table at the young faces illuminated by candlelight. Some still showed suspicion and hardness, but others, like Muller, revealed vulnerability and homesickness that reminded her powerfully of the boys from her own village who had left for war and never returned. "Because," she said finally, "someone has to stop treating other people like enemies. Someone has to remember that we are all human beings, created by the same God, loved by the same families, hoping for the same things, safety, warmth, enough to eat, and to return home alive." She paused, meeting Brenner's eyes directly. "If I cannot show love to my enemies, then I understand nothing about my faith." Private Fisher, 17 years old, and the youngest member of the unit, had been conscripted directly from his studies for the priesthood. He recognized the theological sophistication of Sister Marie Catherine's statement and felt his carefully suppressed religious convictions stirring for the first time since entering military service. Everything he had been taught about enemy populations conflicted with the genuine Christian charity being demonstrated before his eyes. "I was studying to be a priest," he said quietly, "before the war." Sister Marie Catherine's eyes brightened. "And what did you learn about loving your enemies?" Fisher felt his throat tighten. "To pray for those who persecute you, to do good to those who hate you." The words came from years of theological study that he had tried to forget during military training. "And yet," Sister Marie Catherine said gently, "here you sit, armed and ready for violence on the night we celebrate the Prince of Peace." She was not condemning him, merely stating an observable fact. The room fell silent except for the crackling fire and the sound of spoons against wooden bowls. Each soldier found himself confronting personal contradictions between his religious upbringing and current military service. Most had been raised Christian, had attended church regularly before conscription, had been taught the same fundamental values that Sister Marie Catherine was demonstrating. Brenner realized that his unit was experiencing something unprecedented and potentially dangerous, a crisis of moral certainty. These men had been trained to follow orders without questioning the ethical implications. Their effectiveness as soldiers depended on maintaining clear distinctions between friends and enemies, right and wrong, duty and personal conscience. Sister Marie Catherine's simple act of Christian hospitality was undermining the psychological foundations of their military discipline. He should order his men to finish eating quickly and establish proper security protocols. He should create distance between his soldiers and these civilians. He should prevent further conversation that might weaken military resolve. Instead, he found himself asking, "Sister, how do you reconcile your faith with the reality of war?" "I do not reconcile them," she replied honestly. "War is human failure. War is what happens when we forget that our enemies are also children of God." She gestured around the room. "But faith calls us to respond to failure with love, to respond to hatred with kindness, to respond to violence with peace whenever possible. Obergefreiter Weber set down his spoon and stared at his empty bowl. "My father was killed in the Great War," he said slowly. "French artillery. I joined this war partly to avenge him." He looked up at Sister Marie-Catherine. "But now I'm wondering, was the French soldier who fired that shell also someone's son? Did his family grieve when he died? Did they think he was fighting for justice, just as I think I am fighting for justice?" The questions hung in the warm air like incense. Several soldiers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the dangerous territory they were entering. Military training had provided them with clear answers to these questions. Their cause was righteous, their enemies were evil. Victory would justify any sacrifice. But Sister Marie-Catherine's gentle humanity was revealing the inadequacy of those simplistic formulations. "War makes monsters of good men," she said quietly, "unless they find ways to remember their humanity." She stood and began clearing empty bowls. "Rest now, you are exhausted, and tomorrow will bring its own challenges." She directed the soldiers to various rooms throughout the convent where they could sleep on clean straw pallets, a luxury compared to sleeping on frozen ground in the forest. Each man was given additional blankets and directed to washing facilities where they could clean themselves properly for the first time in days. As Brenner established a minimal guard rotation, he overheard conversations among his men that would have been unthinkable 12 hours earlier. Muller was asking Sister Marguerite about her life in the convent. Weber was discussing theology with Fischer. Several soldiers were sharing stories about their families back home. The Oberscharführer realized that his unit was becoming psychologically compromised. Their mission was to establish a military observation post, not to develop personal relationships with enemy civilians. Yet he found himself reluctant to re-establish proper discipline. The warmth and humanity they had experienced felt more real and valuable than any military objective. That night, as his men slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Brenner remained awake reviewing his options. He could restore military protocol in the morning, treating the sisters as potential security threats and maintaining proper distance. He could evacuate the civilians and establish a standard observation post. He could follow regulations and complete his mission according to standing orders. Or he could continue allowing his men to experience something that might permanently alter their understanding of war, duty, and human relationships. Christmas morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Sister Marie-Catherine rose before dawn, as was her custom, and began preparing breakfast for 34 people. She had calculated that feeding the soldiers would exhaust their winter food stores by early February, but she felt strangely peaceful about this prospect. If God had brought these young men to her door, surely God would provide whatever was needed. The soldiers woke to the smell of real eggs, bread, and what appeared to be actual butter. Most had not eaten such a meal since leaving home. As they gathered around the extended table, someone began singing a German Christmas carol. Others joined in, their voices creating harmony that filled the stone building with unexpected beauty. Sister Marie-Catherine listened from the kitchen, recognizing the melody, despite not understanding the words. She began humming along, her voice blending with the soldiers' song in a moment of transcendent unity that seemed to suspend all considerations of war, nationality, and ideology. Muller approached her after breakfast, his young face serious with purpose. "Sister, I need to tell you something. We were ordered to establish a military position here, but this is not a military position anymore. This is a sanctuary." "What are you saying, Hans?" "I am saying that I cannot participate in any action that would bring violence to this place or to you and your sisters." He struggled to find words for feelings he barely understood. "Whatever happens to me, I will not be part of anything that destroys what you have given us here." Muller's declaration represented exactly what Brenner had feared: complete breakdown of military discipline and loyalty. A soldier who refused to follow orders was useless at best, dangerous at worst. Yet as Brenner listened from the doorway, he realized he felt proud of the boy rather than angry. Over the following 3 days, similar conversations occurred throughout the convent. Weber confessed to Sister Bernadette that he had lost all desire for revenge and wanted only to return home to help rebuild his destroyed city. Fischer announced that he intended to resume his religious studies when the war ended. Other soldiers began questioning the justice of their cause and the necessity of continued fighting. By the fourth day, Brenner faced an unprecedented situation. He commanded a unit that had lost all enthusiasm for military objectives. They remained loyal to him personally and would follow his orders, but their hearts were no longer committed to the mission. They had experienced something at the convent that made war seem futile and destructive rather than noble and necessary. On December 28th, intelligence reports reached Brenner indicating that Allied forces were advancing through their sector. Standard procedure required his unit to engage enemy troops and delay their advance through aggressive defensive action. The convent's elevated position would provide excellent defensive advantages for such a mission, but implementing this strategy would transform the sanctuary into a battlefield. It would place Sister Marie-Catherine and her companions directly in the line of fire. It would repay their kindness with violence and destruction. Brenner gathered his men in the convent's main hall and explained the tactical situation. "We have orders to establish defensive positions and engage advancing Allied forces. This location provides strategic advantages that could significantly impact the operation's success." The soldiers looked around the room where they had shared meals, songs, and conversations that had changed their fundamental understanding of human relationships. They thought of Sister Marie-Catherine, who continued feeding them despite their dwindling food supplies. They considered the contradiction between their military duty and the sanctuary they had discovered. "Sir," said Muller, speaking for the group, "request permission to speak freely." Brenner nodded. "We cannot bring war to this place. These women have shown us more genuine humanity than we have experienced anywhere else. We cannot repay their kindness by turning their home into a battlefield." Several other soldiers murmured agreement. Weber stood and added, "Sir, I believe we should evacuate the area and establish defensive positions elsewhere. The tactical advantages here do not justify endangering civilian lives." Fischer, drawing on his theological training, said, "We have experienced something here that is more valuable than any military victory. We have learned what it means to love your enemies. We cannot destroy that lesson by becoming the very thing Sister Marie-Catherine saved us from." Brenner looked around the room at faces that had been transformed over 4 days. These men remained disciplined soldiers, but they were no longer mindless followers of orders. They had developed moral convictions that transcended military duty. They had become men who chose compassion over obedience, humanity over ideology. "Gather your equipment," he said finally. "We evacuate in 1 hour." The soldiers began packing immediately, but their preparations were interrupted by Sister Marie-Catherine entering the hall with a final pot of soup and fresh bread. "You are leaving so soon?" she asked with obvious disappointment. "Military necessity," Brenner replied. "But we want to thank you for your hospitality. You have given us more than food and shelter." "What have I given you?" Muller answered for his commander. "You have given us back our souls, sister. You reminded us that we are human beings, not just soldiers." Sister Marie-Catherine smiled and began serving the final meal. "Then you must promise me something in return." "Anything," said Weber. "Promise that you will remember this feeling. Promise that when this war ends, you will choose to build rather than destroy, to love rather than hate, to forgive rather than seek revenge." She looked directly at each soldier. "Promise that you will teach your children and your children's children that enemies can become friends when we choose to see their humanity." Each man made that promise solemnly. They ate their final meal in silence, knowing they were experiencing something they would remember for the rest of their lives, however long or short those lives might be. As they prepared to leave, Sister Marie-Catherine pressed a small wrapped package into Brenner's hands. "For your journey," she said simply. Outside the convent, Brenner opened the package and found it contained enough food for several days: bread, preserved meat, vegetables, and a small clay pot of soup that was still warm. Attached was a note written in careful German. "For Wilhelm and his 26 sons, may God keep you safe and bring you home to those who love you." The unit marched away from the convent in formation, but they were no longer the same soldiers who had approached 4 days earlier. They had been fundamentally changed by an encounter with radical Christian love that had challenged every assumption about war, duty, and human relationships. They established defensive positions 3 kilometers away and successfully delayed Allied advances for 2 days before being ordered to retreat further. Throughout the remainder of the war, not one member of Brenner's unit was disciplined for cowardice, insubordination, or failure to follow orders. But their commanders noted that they fought differently, more carefully, more reluctantly, with less enthusiasm for destruction and more concern for civilian casualties. Müller survived the war and returned to Bavaria, where he became a teacher and spent 40 years educating children about the dangers of hatred and the power of forgiveness. He never married, dedicating his life to ensuring that future generations would understand the lessons he learned in a Belgian convent. Weber rebuilt his destroyed city of Hamburg, focusing on projects that brought former enemies together for reconstruction efforts. He regularly corresponded with French and British veterans, developing friendships with men who had been trying to eliminate him during the war. Fischer resumed his theological studies and was ordained as a priest in 1948. He spent his career serving in parishes where he emphasized practical Christianity over theoretical doctrine, always remembering the example set by a Belgian nun who fed her enemies. Brenner himself struggled with post-war guilt over his role in military operations that had caused civilian casualties. But he found peace by establishing a foundation that provided aid to war orphans throughout Europe, regardless of their nationality or the circumstances of their parents' deaths. Sister Marie Catherine continued serving at the convent of St. Agnes until her death in 1967 at age 77. She never knew the long-term impact of her Christmas Eve decision to feed enemy soldiers, but letters arrived regularly from Germany for over 20 years, sent by men who wanted to thank her for saving their humanity during the darkest period of their lives. The convent still stands today, now serving as a memorial and retreat center, dedicated to reconciliation between former enemies. The main hall, where 27 soldiers shared soup with 7 nuns, has been preserved exactly as it appeared in 1944, including the long wooden table and stone fireplace, where warmth and compassion overcame hatred and fear. Historical analysis of World War II typically focuses on major battles, strategic decisions, and technological advantages that determined the conflict's outcome. But smaller encounters like the one at St. Agnes Convent reveal something equally important: the power of individual choices to transcend political ideologies and military objectives. Sister Marie Catherine's decision to feed enemy soldiers represented a radical act of resistance against the dehumanization that makes war possible. By treating her enemies as human beings deserving of dignity and compassion, she demonstrated an alternative to the cycle of violence and revenge that perpetuates conflicts across generations. The soldiers who experienced her hospitality carried those lessons forward into their post-war lives, becoming agents of reconciliation in communities that desperately needed healing. Their transformation illustrates how individual acts of love can have consequences far beyond their immediate circumstances. Military historians often debate whether such incidents represent admirable moral courage or dangerous undermining of necessary discipline. From a purely tactical perspective, Brenner's unit became less effective as a fighting force after their encounter with Sister Marie Catherine. Their reluctance to engage in aggressive combat operations could be viewed as a failure of military leadership. Yet from a broader historical perspective, their transformation represents exactly the kind of moral awakening that was necessary for post-war reconstruction and reconciliation. Europe's recovery from World War II required millions of individual decisions to choose cooperation over revenge, understanding over hatred, hope over despair. The story of Sister Marie Catherine and the 27 soldiers demonstrates that even in the midst of total war, humanity can triumph over ideology. It proves that love is not merely a sentiment, but a practical force capable of changing hearts, minds, and ultimately the course of history itself. Her pot of soup did not destroy the soldiers in any physical sense, but it completely eliminated their effectiveness as agents of destruction. By feeding them, warming them, and treating them as human beings rather than enemies, she accomplished something that no military strategy could achieve. She transformed warriors into peacemakers. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.